Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about consensus, and I've talked about consensus other times, in terms of how it can lead to a positive feedback loop if one favors consensus viewpoints. If you should say, well, that's consensus, we should favor it all things equal, or that's non-consensus and we should censor it. And that can lead, again, a positive feedback loop where the things that are slightly consensus become more consensus, which become increasingly more so ad infinitum, all the way to groupthink. But I think it'd be helpful to mention one of the intuitions behind why consensus seems like a good argument. And there is the kernel of a potential argument for why consensus could be a good idea. But it comes from a kind of a false intuition. Here's the right intuition where consensus would actually be a good argument, where I could say, hey, guys, gals, look, here's this consensus argument I'm going to give you. I'm not going to actually give you actual arguments or actual data or actual evidence or anything like this. I'm just going to give you numbers of people who think this particular thing, which seems ridiculous. But there is a situation where it's not ridiculous, and it would be a good idea, and that's where, imagine that some lab of Susie, let's suppose we're talking about science in particular rather than just opinion generally. Susie's over on that island, and she hasn't communicated with any other scientists, and she came to the conclusion that P, proposition P, some particular conclusion. And Doug, he's on a separate island, also has been kept away, and cordoned off from the rest of society, and he did all of the studies, and he came to the conclusion P. And we've got 1,000 such islands in these archipelagos here and there, and we've got all of these different scientists working in isolation, 75%, which all concluded P. Right? Now that's starting to be a pretty good argument. You're like, wow, 75% of these independent, this is crucial, statistically, probabilistically independent viewpoints coming from these folks. Now you have an argument like, well, that's interesting. I don't know that, how good any of these folks are, but the fact that they're all independent, coming to the same conclusion means something. But that is never what happens in science, right? Science, they're all intermingled. They're all meeting at conferences. They're all following each other. They're often just as much copycatters as they are competing. They're slapping each other on the back. One was the former advisee of somebody else who both, they're often just interconnected by virtue of who's advisors for their postdoc or for their graduate career. They're all interrelated in a family structure. They're all interacting constantly. There is no notion of them being probabilistically independent. So the notions of consensus in terms of these percentages mean nothing. But it's helpful to see where it could potentially actually mean something, and that's the origins of the intuition that one has that, hey, that means something, that the consensus is this, right? I mean, supposing people actually had numbers when they say the consensus, because in COVID, they would just say it's the consensus of the experts that, and it was utter BS. It's just the people around them and their groupthink, or that CNN told them where the experts were saying. But let's set that aside, right? So, there are situations, rarefied situations, archipelago situations where one scientist isolated on each of these islands, where if they really do come back with the same conclusion, that is meaningful epistemically, that is in terms of you coming to knowledge or some conclusion about what you should believe. That is meaningful. But you can see how rarefied and how unusual and how completely out of touch that is with what actually occurs. And consensus is never, in fact, like that. And that was your Science Moment. Get yourself a copy of Expressly Human by Dr. Tim Barber and myself, available in bookstores today.